Alright, hello there. So last stream for this, or last video for this project, bubble pipe project. So today, what we're going to look at is reintroducing the particle effect back into the bubble pipe project. Oh, there's a new update. Let's do that in a minute. So previously, most of the work for this video will be done in Studio. So previously we managed to get our actual accessory item. So this is an accessory. So this is using the accessory skeleton. We've got that set up. Well, this is the clothes. So let's just load in. Now, which one was it? Was it number 6? Yeah, so number 6. Just hide that. Let's hide that. So for an actual accessory item, we have to set the skeleton up for the accessory in a way that we can target the particle effect at a specific bone. So when we import this into Studio and we set up our particle effect, it's latched onto the bone that we add to the armature. So bubble pipe, the bone is here. Let's just switch on skeleton. So there's skeleton. So that's the bone listed as the node. And that's our bone, the extra bone that we added to the head armature for our attachment. So this is our attachment version. So this is an actual accessory. So as we mentioned in the previous video, accessories use their own, actual accessories use their own skeletal structure that locks onto whatever bone is being used for the accessory in the avatar. So in this case, it's the head bone. So our accessory skeleton is locking onto the head bone, which allows us to target specifically particle effect at a specific bone. But when we use, so there's our accessory, that's our skeleton. And we can see the extra bone and the default bones. Those are the two here are the default bones that are part of the the attachment skeleton, and then we just added an extra bone that's linked to those. But using the clothing tool, well, this is actually the animation tool, but using the where is the clothing tool? What number was that? Number 10. Yes, so number 10, we use the clothing tool to set up the mesh. So we parent that to the skeleton and the respective, it's actually the left hand, the respective bone that is going to be used as our anchor for our mesh. In this case, it's the bubble pipe. And we have to anticipate the position of our mesh relative to the pose that we want to create. So we set up a mesh ID or body part ID accessory. So we're using the avatar skeleton directly when we do this. But the problem with doing that is that we don't have a target. We can't add a target bone for our accessory because we can't add bones to the avatar skeleton because it breaks it. But that does mean we can still, we can export our pose and our accessory mesh and get those functionally into Studio. So we're importing our two FBX files. So we've got our mesh FBX. So we export the, whoops, wrong one. We export the mesh in situ using the clothing tool. So that produces one FBX. And then we have our pose as a second FBX. And then we import both of them into the project. Now this is derived from the base avatar, but you can use the base, the empty mood product. But there is an issue with this that was discussed in the previous video that I need to run past the creator team to see what's going on, because it should only include the pose and the avatar should be doing its thing, cycling through its normal poses. But that's an issue for another time. So without the skeleton, without the target bone, there's no target bone here. How do we do that with our particle effect without target bone? So in this instance, what we have to do is use the particle effects offset. So we can offset the particle effect from where it spawns. But as was discussed in video 2 in this series, that can be tricky because of the orientation of the individual bones. They're not all set up in a way that makes logical sense. So some bones might be orientated this way, so Z, X and Y, and others might be orientated this way, which means that the particle effect, if we want this coming straight out of the pipe, bubble pipe, but the bone is orientated this way, that's going to be quite a bit of trial and error to try and compensate for the odd orientation of the bone. So let's just, we can't copy paste, but what we can do is make a note of the settings and we'll set up the basic particle properties. So there's our particle. I'm going to create one, add, I'll just call this bubble pipe again. Now we have, whoops-a-daisy, we have a list of all the bones of the avatar that we can use as our target or the origin point for the particle, but we'll get to that in a second. What we'll do first is just get the effect up and running. So 0.5, 2, that was, what was that one? 3. Just get this started. And it should be down at the bottom at the avatar's feet. And it is. .1 and 0.5. Could do with a way of copy pasting particles across projects. 0.5, 0.051. Oops. 1. Okay, 0, 0. Let's just enable particle widget so we can see where the particles are being spawned from. Direction 1. It's gravity 0. Right. Also, we need to change that. That ensures that they're all starting at the same. Let's just change the room actually so that we can see this a bit more clearly. Rooms. There we go. Right, so that's the basic properties copied over. Now remember, we need to save this and then possibly save file, save as before we start doing anything else. Otherwise it'll, I think this is number 9. Make sure that hasn't. Right, so there's our material, there's the particle effect. So let's just close this, reopen, just to make sure that it hasn't messed up with our material. It doesn't because it has. So skeleton, particle. Right, so what we're going to do now is change target node, none at the moment. So what we want is LF hand preview. And there we can see what we were talking about before in the previous episode, of that the orientation of the bone, even though we've got the settings set up correctly just for spawning the particles, they spawn upwards based on the, well, it's female O3 master root rather than non. But as soon as we use another bone, because the bone's orientation is different, so we're looking at the red widget to tell us the direction the particles are going. So now we've got to do 2 things. So let's make this a little easier to see. So we're going to close the radius. So we're turning that to 0 so that it spawns from a specific point. And it's still spawning along the red arrow. So we want something that is going to essentially spawn in the opposite direction. So direction is currently set to 1. We want the opposite, so we go -1. So that's our bone that's used for the mesh as the attachment point. We've got the particles in the right direction, generally speaking, but now we need to change its position along, I don't know which axis that is. I think that's the x-axis. So along the red one. So we want to shove this that way a little bit. So let's try x-axis 0.5. So this changes the position. So x, y, and z. See what that does. That's a little bit too much. So we can see the origin marker So we have to get that inside the pipe somehow. So we need to reduce it back that way and then a little bit this way. So this is where your trial and error comes into play. Hang on a second. Just got to do a little bit of admin. We got some spam has to be dealt with. Right, that's done. Sorry about that. So, yes, we've got to move the particle origin. So what is that going to be? It's going to be about point. So if that's 0.5, 0.25 is there. This is going to be about 125, so it's going to be about 175. Let's try 175. 175. Ooh. Almost perfectly in, well, it's aligned that way. So now we need to just do a little bit of adjustment that way. So that is the blue handle, I think is the Z axis. So we need to go backwards from that a tiny amount. And that's super tiny amount. So that's probably going to be well, let's just do 0.5 just to make sure that it is going in the right direction. Oh, no, that's positive. We want negative. Yeah, so that is the right direction. That is going to be a tiny amount. Let's try 0.1. Ooh, almost. Let's try 0.09. Nope, just a tiny bit more. 0.08. And there we go. It's inside and basically replicating what our accessory item. Let's turn on the. It's a little bit higher up, but it's in the approximately the same location. So to shift it higher up, we need to. That will be negative y. So the green handle, I think, is the y-axis. So we need to go that way a little bit. So that's going to be minus. Let's just do -1. Yeah, so that's too high. So that's going to be minus 0.0. 3. Zero 2. Yeah, that's about right. Probably shift it over a little bit more, so let's go with 1.8. Yeah. So it's not necessarily going to be as accurate as using a bone target as we can do with an actual accessory. But when we use position, we can shift the spawn origin, the origin from where the particles are emitted. We can shift that and get it more or less, well, it's relatively precise relative to being able to type values. We can get that into place by using the origin position offset. So remember that this is a clothing based body part attachment with a custom pose that we've derived from, what did we derive from for this one? The avatar. So that's for the male avatar, that's 191. It's not an attachment, it's a body part attachment. But we've managed to use the position offset to create an approximate version of our particle effect. So let's just save this and then add our material to our pipe. Looking for the bubbles. There they are, bubble. So that's our bubble effect without the opacity. And we just load in the opacity, and of course fidelity, the graphical fidelity of your bubble depends on how you've got your opacity set up and essentially what you've done with the diffuse. And remember, no, that's okay. Hasn't done it this time. We can also use or switch to composite blend, which will make the bubbles slightly more transparent. And then if we want, let's use the mission. Let's enable emission, like that. There are our glowy magical pipe bubbles. So that is basically that same effect. Oh no, one thing we have forgotten to do. Particles. We've forgotten to change the evolution over time. So what were the settings for that? 0.5, 0.75. So what this does is it gives us, that's 0.75. Goes to 0.2, gives us our pop, our bubble pop. As bubbles are wont to do. Save. So just to recap then, this will be a relatively short video today because we're just dealing with the particle system, because we did the proper accessory in the first one, set up the particle in the second one, set up the pose with, well, the body part mesh with pose in the third video, and today is just, or in this video, it's just the particle effect. So the overview is as we mentioned at the beginning, we're importing or appending the mesh into the clothing file so that we can position it relative to the skeleton and lock it onto using bind to armature, which drops in an armature modifier and a vertex group, so object data properties, that corresponds to the bone, LF hand, which I think is that one. So this is attached to that by this group, which we then export as a separate FBX file. We then import, or can import, that into the animation tool, and it will automatically, once we set it up, latch onto the corresponding bone, which will then allow us to pose the avatar, create our pose. We export that as a second FBX. We import both into either the empty mood or an avatar product, so 191 for the male, 80 for the female. Where's the mesh ID? We give it an arbitrary mesh ID so that it doesn't conflict with any of the defaults that might exist. Set up the pose, so we create an action. We created our custom action, so it should be that one at the bottom, start standing. So there is our animation sequence. We load that in as the asset, set up the duration as a static pose. So this would be a pose that is in that position all the time. What should happen is that it should only override that set of bones, allowing the rest of the avatar to do what it normally does. But there seems to be a bit of a bug there, so just be aware of that. Got that set up. Then we set up the particle. Get that replicating the previous proper accessory. And then we use the origin data position to offset the origin so that it's inside the pipe, which compensates for the lack of bones that we can use as our, well, origin target, as we can do with accessories. So you could do the same thing with, well, a wand. Let's say you did a pose with a wand and you had the avatar gripping onto the handle. And as an accessory, you can put a bone at the top of the wand. So there's our bone. And you could use that as your spawn point. But without that, we have to use the offset. So these, to shift that and position it or reposition it where it needs to be. So you could be emitting a particle effect as a, you know, as a spell effect or something. But that is reintroducing a particle effect into a body part mesh in a way that we can control the position of the effect. Then, of course, all you need to do is save the project, do the info stuff, and then submit to the catalog. So, that's a short one today. We'll call it quits there. The files are available on the website. So we shall leave it here and see you. I don't think there's anything else. See you on the next video, which might be something completely different. I have to decide on that. But yes, so we'll see you on the next video. Bye for now.